Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Chullin Daf Ayin Beis Amud Beis and also Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, which was really a lot that we're supposed to catch up on. And then Emir Hashem will get to the top of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, almost caught up. We're starting at a Mishnah toward the bottom of Ayin Beis Amud Aleph, and the Mishnah reads as follows, similar to some previous Mishnahs that we had learned about a behema. Though this Gemara is going to be a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more complex. Says the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom on Ayin Beis Amud Aleph. Behema hamak shalele. There's an animal that's having difficulty in delivery. V'hotzi ubar es yado v'chatcha. And the fetus extends its foreleg, or one of its legs, out of the uterus, out of the body, and the roe cuts off the arm. Ve'achar kach shochat es imo. So the flow of events, we got to get it super clear. Mak shalelid, hotzi ubar chatcha, and then shchita. So what is the halachic status of the ubar? Says the Gemara, habasar tahor, that it is perfectly permissible to eat the ubar, even though it's missing a leg. So says Rashi, habasar tahor, she'ein behema mekabelas tuma mechayim. Like there's no, even though the leg is Ever Minachai Nevela, or Tuma Ever Minachai, which is Nevela, but it's not Metame the Ubar back, because the Ubar is, as Rashi points out, it's not Mekabelas Tuma Mechaim, it's still alive. Good. Case number 2. In this case is going to be the subject of much discussion because it has a machlokes of Meir and the Chachamim, and it's going to govern and cover a lot of our time today. Let's say that in a case of an animal that's having difficulty delivering, the mother is shechted, and only afterwards is a leg amputated. So the flow is reversed, right? We don't have the cutting happening before the shechita. Now the leg, you shechted the mother and then shechted the limb. So says the Gemara, machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim. Habasar magen avela divrei Rav Meir. Habasar magen avela, Rashi, Habasar magen avela, basar ha'ubar maga ever min achai shu metame kin avela. So that means that the leg, after shchita, if you cut off the leg, then we have a problem because the animal on the inside is alive. When you cut off the leg is now ever min achai. The leg that's ever min achai is metame, the ubar that's on the inside, because now it's not connected to the mother anymore. Contact.
It's not touching.
These are big discussions in the Gemara as to what.
Okay. You understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, but it just assumes that there was contact. It's definitely an assumption. The first question we're going to see in the Gemara is that it's beis hastarim. It's not in a public space, and usually we have no tumah beis hastarim. We're going to discuss, exactly how the tumah happened, but that's a very fair question. But that's what Rashi says over here. Fine. Yeah, and then the Gemara continues with the shita of the Chachamim. The Chachamim omrim, no, it's not maga nevela. They say it's maga treifa shchuta. It's maga treifa. You're right that it is not a nevela, but it is a treifa. And what kind of tumah? What does that mean? Treifa's tame. We're going to discuss that in the Gemara as well. The ma'inaf kamina. Treifa's not tame. So we'll discuss that too in the Gemara. So we have a machlokes whether or not we assume that the leg that was cut off, again, we're talking about case number 2 here, where the shchita of the mother was done first, and then the leg of the ubar was removed next. So there, the Gemara says, Rav Meir holds that there is tumas nevela, because Ever min achai is tamei tumas nevela, as we have in other places in Shas, and we saw earlier in this Masechta, and the Chachamim say, no, it's maga treifa shchuta. It's only treifa. Let's turn to the top of Ayin Beis Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, let's analyze the sheet of the Chachamim that it's only a treifa and not nevela status. Says the Gemara, mamatzinu the treifa sheshchitasa metaharta. Let's say that you have a case of a treifa animal, and you shecht a treifa animal. You don't kill it. Is that animal a nevela? You shecht a treifa. No, it's not a nevela. It's a shechted treifa. So there's no tuma. So if it's true that when you shecht a treifa, you can remove the nevela status. Af shchitas behema tetaher es ha'ever. So too, it should be the same thing that when you do the shchita and the behema, it is metaher the aver from nevela status, of aver minachai nevela status. Okay, that's the chachamim. Omar lahem. Rav Meir said, this is a Mishnah. It's a complex Mishnah. Omar lahem. Rav Meir says back, Omar lahem Rav Meir, lo, you're not right. Im tihara shchitas trefa osa davar shagufa. When we say that we shecht a trefa, and therefore when the trefa is shechted, it's not a nevela and it's not metame. That's only true because it's its own body. However, with an ubar, it's not true. To tahir es ha'ever davar she'ena gufa. Are you going to say that when you shecht a trefa, you shecht an animal, and there's an ubar inside? No, it's different. We're saying that it should be that it's you can be metahir a trefa in when it's only its own body, but you cannot be metahir an aver that extends out of the animal. That should not work. And says the Gemara, let's take it even a step further. Says the Mishnah, I should say, we're 5 lines down on ayin beis amid beis. Minayin letrefa sheshchitasa metaharta. By the way, says Rav Meir, how do we even know that you're right? Mehechatesi, says the Gemara, that if I have an animal that I know is a trefa, that if I shecht it, that it's not an avela. How do I know that? Says the Gemara, maybe we should say as follows. Behema tmeya asura be'achila. When you have a behema that's tame and you're not allowed to eat that animal, av trefa asura be'achila. So too, we would say, of course, that a trefa cannot be eaten. Ma behema tmeya ein shchitasa metaharta. And let's say I have a camel. What does my shchita do to the camel? Literally nothing. So maybe we should say, af trefa lo titarena shchita. So Rav Meir pushes stark against the Chachamim and says, I'm not sure that what you're saying is true, Chachamim, to say that if you do a shchita on a trefa, that it loses its nevela status. That was what the Chachamim said in our Mishnah. Rav Meir is not having it. Says the Gemara, the Chachamim say back to Rav Meir, lo, you're wrong. There's a difference between a behemoth tmeya, such as a camel or a pig, versus an animal that is a trefa, such as a cow with a trefa, right? Those are very different things. By the behemoth tmeya, it never had a shasa kosher. The camel never had one moment of its life, from the moment it was conceived until the moment it dies, that it would ever be considered a food that had a shasa kosher. Masha'en kain tomar betrefa. But if you have a cow that happens to have a trefa, shahaisala shasa kosher. The trefa happened when it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years old. But there was a moment in time, at least a flash of a moment in time, when an animal actually had a shasa kosher. So the Chachamim say back to Rav Meir, you can't bring me a raya from a behemoth tmeya, because a behemoth tmeya never had a shas kosher. So that's what the Chachamim push back. Says the Gemara, all right, tol lucha ma shevesa. Let's use your example. Haresha nolda trefa mina beten minayin. The Chachamim argued back to Rav Meir and said, well, a behemoth tmeya never had a shasa kosher, but a cow that became a treif at age 5 did have a shasa kosher. Pushes back the Gemara and said, the Mishnah, and says, okay, what if an animal was born a treifa? Guess what? It too never had a shasa kosher. Says the Gemara, lo, you are not correct again. I understand your pushback, but that you're taking it too far. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to say that the shasa kosher means there has to be an actual moment in time, because otherwise you'd be right that an animal that's born a treifa never had a shas kosher. What I mean to say is that the behemoth tmeya shekain ein b'mina shchita. There is no shchita by a camel. If you eat a camel with nechira, or if you eat a camel with shchita, it doesn't matter. I presume there's no nafkamina at all, right? Because by the min of a behemoth tmeya, shchita is a non-entity. However, tomar betrefa sheyesh b'mina shchita. Okay, this cow happens to be a trefa, maybe even from birth. and it doesn't have a shas kosher. But l'chol apachos, the min of cows is that they're tahor. So this is how the Chachamim push back and why they are able to say in our Mishnah that that when the leg is cut off after the shechita of the mother, that yes, it's metame de ubar, but it's not metame de ubar kinevela. It's metame de ubar only as a treifa only. It's funny, we use the word treif socially, colloquially. It's much worse to say tameh. A cow is tahor, but maybe treif. A camel is mamish tameh. We just use the word treif very loosely in that food's treif. If you eat a food that doesn't have meat in it, it's not treif. It might not be kosher, but it's not treif. Now with all the hechsherim and all the chemicals and enzymes, things are so complicated in the kashrus world. And in fact, a lot of kashrus organizations have policies that are extra legal in regards to psak halacha because they don't want to have slippery slope. It's not just anymore because the enzymes are so complicated. Okay, fine. Says the Gemara, Ben Shmona Chai, that when we are talking about a cow that's born in the 8th month of gestation, Ein shchitaso metaharto, there is an example of this animal. This is one of the exceptions of an animal that is a tahor, but there is no shchita by a cow that's born in its 8th month. And in fact, the Meforshim explain, even by humans, we assume that that baby is a nefel, that they're not viable. This is obviously not relevant in modern science, but it certainly was an assumption back in the day, and we've seen this in previous Masechtas numerous times, that if a baby is born in the 7th or 9th month, they are considered to be viable births. But if they're born in the 8th month for some reason that we're not going to dig into now, they are not considered to be viable births. So if a baby is born in the 8th month, so then ein shchita s'ksher lefisha ein b'mino shchita. We assume that that animal is no different than a tamid. I wonder how this plays out in psak halacha. I don't know that it.
Anything in this world that you ever asked, that you based on 8 or 9, like
No.
based on weight and health, right?
It's only health. It's health first, weight second. And so, like I've done brises on babies that are 4 pounds. But there is a very interesting machlokas aposkim. If a baby's bris is delayed and they're not yet 6 pounds, we wait until they're 6 pounds. What?
Once you wait, you wait.
Once you're delayed from Yom Hashmini, then we want you to be 6 pounds.
There's no nothing.
No, 8th month, 9th month. Nobody even blinks. And by the way, the Chazon Ish holds you have to wait till the baby's 6.5 pounds, which is a chumrah de asili de kula, because you're saying a machmer has to be 6.5 pounds because all of his shiur are more typically very strict. But what ends up happening is the bris is delayed. So it's like an interesting twist. So sometimes these things come up, and I've asked a lot of shilas. I'm like, what does 6 pounds mean? Does that mean like 6.0? Like, what are we looking at? Everybody first is like, no, when they get close to 6 pounds, it's a health measure. It's not it's halakha most we see. It's not like that. It's not like that. So if a parent says, I hold like the Chazon Ish, I have to wait till 6.5 pounds. I'm like, okay, that doesn't matter to me. I just need to get you on the books, yeah. Okay. So says the Gemara, I don't understand something. And it's a little bit, David, like the question you asked, not exactly, but you'll see it shmeksav. It's very similar. If you look back at the second case that we just learned, where we saw the machlokas of Meir and the Chachamim, the case was where the mother was shechted first and the leg was cut off second. The leg of the fetus was cut off after that. And Rav Meir was of the opinion that the animal is tamei tumas nevela. The Chachamim said, no, it's not. It's tamei because of tarfus. So ask the Gemara, Amai. I don't understand why there's any tuma at all. After all, tumas beis hastarim hi. The tumas beis hastarim lo metamya. This is a principle that we really haven't seen in Shas before in regards to tuma, not in a direct way. But this principle is that when tuma is contracted in a hidden part of the body, then we assume that the tuma, it's as if it never happened. So what's the problem? The problem is that where was the leg cut? It was cut in the beis hastarim of the leg area, of the delivery area, and because of that, it's beis hastarim. So what? So then it shouldn't be tameh at all, because says the Gemara, "V'tumas beis hastarim lo metamya." Says the Gemara, maybe you want to say Lema Rav Meir l'taime. Maybe Rav Meir in our Mishnah, who is the one who is machmir and says that when you cut the leg, the ubar is tameh tumas nevela and not treifa. Maybe he holds taka that there is tuma in beis hastarim. Ditnan. We have a Mishnah and from Maseches Kelim. Shlosha al shlosha. If you have a garment that's 3 tefach by 3 tefach that was tamei tumas medris. So let's say that a nida or a zav or a zava they leaned on top of a handkerchief that was 1 foot by, has to be at least that size, 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim. It becomes tamei. Shenechlak. If it becomes cut or torn, so by the way, that's how you remove tuma in a case like this, because it's tumas medris. If you tear it, the tuma goes away. So it's tahor mina medris. Aval tame maga medris. However, as it's being torn, it's like a piece of paper to show it. As it's being torn, so then like you're tearing here. So like the paper, the fibers of the paper are beis hastarim. They're hidden. Until I tore them, you couldn't see the fibers of the paper, fabric, whatever. As I'm tearing them, we're seeing now the cross section of the paper. It's very small. Our paper's super, 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 super thin. Their paper was probably not like this. Obviously, the papyrus, whatever they had. So says the Gemara, what does Rav Meir hold? He says that when it comes to the Beis Hastarim, and we're halfway down on Ayin Beis and Beis. When it comes to the Beis Hastarim of the paper, what does Rav Meir hold? That you're still Tamei Maga Medrash to be Rav Meir. The word Vitanya doesn't belong there. We're actually still mid Mishnah. And Amar Rav Yossi b'chi be'eza Medrash Nagazeh Ela she'im Naga zo Naga bo zav she'yeh Tamei Maga zav. So we're not going to really focus on Rav Yossi because he fundamentally disagrees with Rav Meir. But what we see from Rav Meir, it's very interesting, is that when you tear it, the tuma still transfers, which means that he seems to hold that there is tumas beis hastarim. So perhaps we should say that our Mishnah, that at least Rav Meir within our Mishnah, who holds that if shchita happens first and the leg was cut off second, that the ubar has tuma, it must be that our Mishnah is like Rav Meir, who holds that tumas beis hastarim is metame against the Havamin of our Gemara. Says the Gemara, two possible answers. La vitmar Allah, we have an Amora on this. Amar Ula, lo shanu ela shlosha al shlosha shenechlak. That's only true when it's a 3 tefach by 3 tefach garment that was torn. Aval shalosh al shalosh habaos mi beged gadol b'shas prishas and me'avin. If you have a 3 etzba by 3 etzba, very, very small garment, so now we're looking at 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, and it comes from a beged gadol, a larger cloth, b'shas prishas and me'avin, when it's separated, when that 3 by 3 etzba by 3 etzba by 3 etzba piece is cut away, mikablos tuma me'avin, they just touch part of the parent garment. It's not cross section. Ula is saying we're not talking about beis hastarim. That's not why Rav Meir in our Mishnah holds that way. The question of the Gemara was excellent. Of course, there's no tumas beis hastarim. That's not where the tuma comes from. It just obviously brushed up against the larger garment. Hanami, our case too, that when the leg transferred, b'shas prishas me'ever, mekabel tuma me'ever. David, to your point, there must have been a physical contact when you cut off the leg. It must have touched the ubar. It must have touched the ubar. And that's where the tuma comes from. It's not theoretical. It's not conceptual. It's not beis hastarim.
As you say, get the rove cut, the other half is still touching.
It's not the Havamin of the Gemara. The Gemara here seems to assume that it touched each other. Not beis hastarim touched each other, but like actual contact. Actual. Pashat, there's going to be blood. I agree to that.
Yeah.
That's true. Again, remember, the inner animal is still alive. Right? That's our assumption because it's rapid fires. Shchita, cut the leg. So yeah. But that's answer number 1 of the Gemara. Ravina Amar, Beged Lav Lechatzicha Koi, Ubar Lechatzicha Koi. Ravina gives another answer. He says, why is it that there's Tuma in our case? After all, it's Beis Hastarim. Says the Gemara, a Beged is not meant to be cut, but an Ubar is. V'chol ha'omed lachtoch, turning to the top of Ayin Gimel Amar Aleph, Kechatoch Dami. Anything that is generally supposed to be cut, the ubar is supposed to be removed from the mother at some point, so then it's kechatuch dami. Rashi, v'harei nogen zebazeh. They're touching each other. And and therefore it's as if the ubar is separated, and then the leg is cut, and then they're touching each other, so it's just straight up tuma. But it's relying on the principle of kol ha'omed lachtoch kachatoch. Says the Gemara, Kiman, who is that like? Says the Gemara, it has to be only like Rav Meir. It has to be Rav Meir. Why? Ditznan, because Rav Meir is the one who holds that kol ha'omed lachtoch is kachatoch dami. Where do we see that? From a Mishnah in Mikvos, top line of Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. Kol yados hakelim shein arukos. If you have a handle to a utensil and the handle is exceedingly long, the asid lekatzitzon. In the future, you plan on cutting it up to a certain amount. Let's say it's a 1 foot handle. You plan on only keeping 6 inches of the handle. What's the din? Matvil ad makomida divri Rav Meir. We're going to read the parentheses, but really the second half of the parentheses is wrong. What do we see from Rav Meir? Where do you do tvila? Only up to the place where you plan on keeping the handle. What does that show you? Kol ha'omed lachtoch is kechatoch dami. Therefore, it must be that the answer of Ravina is dependent on Rav Meir. So maybe, perhaps, our Mishnah is only going to make sense according to Rav Meir. And it shouldn't say v'chachamim omer. If you look on the side, it should say Reb Yehuda Omer. That's what it's actually listed in the Mishnah in Mikvaos. Reb Yehuda Omer, ad sheyat bilas kulo. So what you see here is a machlokes tanoim about whether or not we hold of the principle of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami. Rav Meir seems to hold of it, and Reb Yehuda doesn't seem to hold of it. So what that implies then is Ravina's answer really doesn't work for our Mishnah. Why? Because Ravina wants to say that the answer to our Mishnah is predicated on the principle of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami. But if only Rav Meir holds that way, then perhaps the Chachamim in our Mishnah don't hold that way. But if it's no principle of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami according to the Chachamim in our Mishnah, then how would, even according to them who say that there's treif, but how do you get maga treifa? After all, it's not, they don't hold of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami. So says the Gemara 4 lines down in Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, afilu tema rabbanon. Even with Ravina's answer, we could still understand our Mishnah with the Shita of the Rabbanon. Because chibure ochlin keman demifrisi damu unegi'e bahadade. That when it comes to things that are edible, so then we assume that it's demifrise. That word means that they're actually cutting, or that they could be cut, and therefore they're touching. So a similar answer, because even though in general, perhaps the Chachamim in our Mishnah don't hold of the principle of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami, but by foods they do. By something edible they do. Good. So now we saw, I'm just going to review because we got a hold cup here. We asked the question, why is it that there's any tuma at all? It's based on starim. So answer number 1 was there was actual physical contact. That was the answer of Ula. Answer number 2 was it was based on the principle of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami. So asks the Gemara 6-7 lines down on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, and we're going to stop on a few lines down on the top of Ein Gimel Amud Beis, which Hashem will get there before Mar. Bishlama le'Ula. I understand according to Ula, who said that there really was tuma transfer. Hainu diktani chatcha. There we have the language of chatcha. If you look in our Mishnah, it says, shachat es imo ve'achar kach chatcha. Hainu diktani chatcha. Ela Ravina. Ravina says it doesn't matter if it's actually cut. Because Ravina is relying on the principle of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami. And if that's true, my chatcha, who cares if you cut off the leg or don't cut off the leg? At the end of the day, if you hold of kol ha'omed lachtoch kechatoch dami, it doesn't matter if the leg was cut off. We would assume that there's tuma even if the leg wasn't cut off. So there's no way, says the Gemara, that our Mishnah would have said chatcha if Ravina is right. And says the Gemara, that's not true. And we answer with a common refrain, Aidi detana reisha chatcha, because in the reisha of our Mishnah, that was the first case we opened with tonight, that a behema is maksha leleid, and first the leg was chatcha, and then the mother was shechted. We said the ubar was kosher. There we needed the word v'chatcha. There we needed it. But in this case, you're taka right. In the seif, according to Ravina, we don't need chatcha. The only reason it was there was because we needed the word chatcha in the reisha. Tani nami seifa chatcha. So now we see that both of these answers are viable. What we were concerned about is how could it be that there's tuma in the second case, in a case where the shchita of the mother happened first, followed by the chaticha of the limb of the aver that was protruding from the body. How could there be tuma? Hare, it's beis hastarim. Ula says, no, it's not beis hastarim. There's actual physical contact happening between these two things. and we need to be concerned about it. And according to Ravina, it's based on the principle of kol omed lachtoch kechatuch tami. At the two dots, 9-10 lines down, v'chachamim omer maga treifa shchuta, says the Gemara, and I shared this question when we learned the Mishnah. What do you mean that a treifa is going to be metame something? What does that mean? Says the Gemara, treifa shchuta mi metamya? If you shech the treifa, they're not tame. Tuma is by a nevela. There is no tuma by a treifa. Says the Gemara, not so fast. There is in fact a case where a treifa is metamya. Where is that? Kida avuha de Shmuel. Amar avuha de Shmuel, treifa sheshachda metama b'mukdashin. If you have an animal that's a treifa, and that animal touches something, that animal is now an animal shechted, and then it touches an animal that's hektish, it's matrif the animal that's hektish. So that is a very unique and rare case. If I touched a treifa, no problem at all. Wouldn't make me tamei. No problem at all. Next, says the Gemara, and now we're going to get into the belly of the beast of this discussion of Rav Meir and the Chachamim about why Rav Meir held that if the shechita took place first and the leg was cut after, why Rav Meir holds stark that the animal is a nevela, whereas the Chachamim hold that the animal is not a nevela but rather a treifa. And we're going to see many versions of this conversation. A lot of this is repetitive. We still need to hold cup, but a lot of this is repetitive. So it says the Gemara as follows. We had said in our Mishnah, Ma matzinu b'treifa sheshchitasa mitaharta. We had said in our Mishnah that we know that by a treifa, that if an animal was a treifa and it's shechted, then it's not metame tumas nevela. The shechita helped to reduce it from a nevela down to a treifa. Av shchitas behema titahares ha'ubar. So too, say the Chachamim in our Mishnah, we should be good to go. This is the quote from our Mishnah. We should say that it should lower the status of the ubar from a nevela to a treifa. So that was a quote from our Mishnah. It says the Gemara Tanya. We have a brisa that adds some color to our conversation here between Rav Meir and the Chachamim. Amar lahen Rav Meir. Rav Meir says back to the Chachamim, V'chi mi tiharo le'ever zeh midei nevela. What was it that would make an aver not a nevela? Shchitas imo. So says Rav Meir to the Chachamim, I don't understand. Im kain, if you're able to take a shchita, an animal, and you can shecht it, and it will remove a status, im kain tatirenu be'achila. Then why can't you eat the animal after you shecht it? In other words, the Chachamim were of the opinion that when you shecht the animal, it removes it from nevela down to treifa. Rav Meir says there's no halfsies. If what you're telling me is that shchita is a matir to remove nevela, then shouldn't the shchita also remove the psul of the treifa to make it mutter for achila? Rav Meir is bothered by the fact that this shchita only functioned at 50%. Normally, shchita is a matir for achila. Here, the Chachamim are saying there's only a partial matir. You brought it down from nevela to treifa, says Rav Meir. No, more. If you're telling me that it works for that, it should be matir the treifa for achila. Amrulo, and this answer seems like a non sequitur. The Gemara is going to call this out. Harbe matzeles. Al she'ena gufa yoser migufa. There are times that we have something that can be saved that isn't part of the body, namely the ubar, even more than the body itself. This is a very hard flow because it really doesn't answer the question that Rav Meir was asking. Rav Meir wanted to know why the shchita wouldn't be matir the food. And the Chachamim said, there's a difference between the animal itself and the ubar. What does that have to do with anything? But we're not going to get to that yet. First, let's finish this part of the brisa. Shaharei shaninu, and this is a Mishnah that we learned a couple of days ago on Maseches Amud Aleph. Chotech mina ubar shebeme'eha muter be'achila. If we were to reach into the animal while the mother was pregnant and cut off a limb of the ubar, muter be'achila. Machlokas we saw in the Gemara between Rav and others as to whether or not it's Rav and Rav Yochanan, if it's muter to eat the leg. Perhaps we're only talking about eating the ubar. But one way or the other, we see that there's a heter, but let's call it by the ubar. But if I reach inside the animal and I cut minat chol uminat kleos, and I cut from the spleen or from the kidneys, aser be'achila. So we see the Chachamim's principle is that sometimes there are things that are not part of the body, namely the ubar, that have more of a kula than things that are part of the body. But my ka'amri, how does this answer Rav Meir's question? Rav Meir was bothered by something totally different than this. You're totally not following the flow. Rav Meir said, hey, why was the shechita only matir from nevela to treifa? Why wasn't it matir for achila? It's okay. So it says Gemara, "My Kamri, what was the flow between Rav Meir's question and the Chachamim's answer? Amar Rava, va'amar la Kedi." As we've seen many times, Kedi might have been a person's name. Perhaps it just means a person who answered. And I have a note on the side here in regards to the name of Kedi in the Hagos V'Tzionim, here on the side of the Oz V'Hadar. And here's what it says: Hu Shem Chacham, O Pirush Bechinam Bilti Shum Haskaras Chacham. It's Ploni Almoni. So it's either a person's name of Kedi or it's Ploni Almoni. One way or the other. What does Rava or Kedi say? So says the Gemara, Chasure Mechsera v'hachitani. You're 100% right to ask Maika Amri. You're right. It's a non sequitur. The question and the answer are missing something in between. So now we're going to see a fuller version of this brisa that's repetitive to what we've seen now for the third or fourth time. Halfway down on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. Amar lehen Rav Meir. That was his question that he just asked. Rav Meir doesn't like going halfway. So he says, if you're going to tell me that the shchita works to reduce it down to a treifa, maybe it should be matrid outright altogether. So says the Gemara, Amrulo, they said back to him, Treifa tochiach. I'll bring you a beautiful raya from a treifa. What are you talking about? The Chachamim said back to Rav Meir. We see this all the time. This is normal. You have a treifa, you shecht it. It's not an avela. Rav Meir, what are you even asking? Why are you bothered about a shchita that only has half of an impact? Amar lehen lo. Rav Meir, and again, the modified brisa. Rav Meir says back to them, Im tiara shchitas treifa osa. That's only davar shehu gufa. I might have thought that the shchita that we do on a treifa, the only thing it could do is with the body of the treifa itself. But perhaps to taheres ha'ever davar she'enu gufa, no. Maybe we would have said, says Rav Meir, the chachamim were pasha to them, that if you shecht, it doesn't matter if you're talking about the animal or the ubar, the shchita lowers everything down to an avela. Says Rav Meir, oh, hold on, I have to split a hair over here. Maybe what we should say is that when we do shchita on an animal that's a treifa, it only impacts the core animal itself, the mother that you're doing the shchita to. But had it been that it was talking about the ubar, that's not really the mother. That's another entity. So Rav Meir says that maybe that shchita should have been matir, the ubar. So Amrulo, the Chachamim say back to Rav Meir, no. Why? Because harbe matzelas al she'ein gufa yosim gufa. I'll bring you precedent that even the ubar gets more of a heter than even the mother. That if while the mother is still pregnant, we cut it, we reach inside into the uterus and we cut off a limb and then you do shchita, the ubar is mutter. However, when it comes to the mother itself, that's not true. Titaris aver davar she'enu gufa. So that's why the Gemara, skipped a line there. What? Amrulo, just make sure. Did I read everything? Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So it says the Gemara that so this is their conversation where we see a fuller version of Rav Meir and the Chachamim. The non sequitur presentation we saw at the open of the two dots, a third of the way down, was Chasure Mechsar Rava or Kedi filled in the gaps. We're going to see the same exact conversation again because the brisa, we have another brisa that corrects this actual Mishnah that we saw earlier. Last of the short lines on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. Amar lehen Rav Meir v'chima tiaru le'ever zemi denevela. Amrulo shchita sima. Im kein tatirenu be'achila. Hey, why does your shchita only work halfway? Amrulo the Chachamim said treifa tochiach. We know from a treifa that that's how it works. Rav Meir shechchita sem etaharta midenevela ve'ena matirta be'achila. We know that this is the case. Amar lehen Rav Meir says, hey, wait 1 second. Im tiaru shchitas treifa osa. And now we have an addition of the brisa, which is going to carry a little bit of the rest of the day once we read it. If we know that that by a treifa, that when you do a shchita, that it's matirit from nevela, that it's no longer nevela. In tiara shchita treifa osa ve'es ha'ever hamedul dalba, and if there's a limb that's really by and large detached, meaning it's hanging by skin, but it's not actually a limb. It's going to die at some point. It's not a good limb. So it says the Gemara, the Aver Medul Dal Ba, is also going to lose the nevela status with shchita. That's davar shegufa. Titaris ha'uber she'ena gufa, says Rav Meir. How can you say that? So Amru lo, the Chachamim say back to him, Harbe matzelas al she'ena gufa yoser migufa, sha'arei shaninu chotech mina uber shebeme'ah mote be'achila, minat chol minat kleos aser be'achila. End of brisa. So what we see over here is a verification of the machlokas between Rav Meir and the Chachamim. And just to say their machlokas super clearly, which is that everyone seems to agree that when you do shchita on the mother, that it removes the treifa status, it removes the nevela status down to treifa. Where the Chachamim disagree with Rav Meir is about the ubar. According to Rav Meir, he's unsure that you can lower the status of the ubar down to treifa. Maybe it's still going to be a nevela. Ma'ashein came the Chachamim, they say it does lower the treifa, the nevela. It does lower the ubar down to a treifa instead of a nevela. Good. So says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish, machlokes that the kimachlokes beubarin, the machlokes that we had in regards to an ubar, namely the machlokes we saw in our mission on the bottom of Ayin Beis Amud Aleph where we started today. That according to Rav Meir, the ubar where the shechita of the mother happened first and the leg was cut second, Rav Meir says the ubar is going to be a nevela, and the Chachamim say it's only a treifa. So it says Rav Shimon ben Lakish, kemachlokes beubarin, the same machlokes that we have in regards to the leg of the ubar, kach machlokes be'evarin. The same thing is true with limbs. This is referring to the limbs that the brisa, that the Tanya Namihachi brisa added in about the Ever Hamedulda. If they have a leg that is literally hanging on by skin, by a thread, so then, according to Rav Shimon ben Lakish, the same exact machlokas between them applies. However, not everyone agrees to that. The Rav Yochanan Amar machlokas be'ever de ubar. No, Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Rav Yochanan disagrees with Reish Lakish. He says the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rav Meir is only by a limb of the ubar. Aval be'ever de behema. But when it comes to the limb that is meduldal, that it's really detached, only connected by a thread, divrei akol shchita osa nipol. Everyone agrees that the shchita will make it as though it's detached and make it as though it's a problematic piece of animal. In fact, Rashi says this osa and nipol, and that's about 10 lines from the bottom. Dibur maschal osa nipol b'shas shchita harehu kenofel mimenu ve'ein shchita so mo elaslo. So this is the machlokas that we have between Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan. The machlokas about Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan is whether or not the machlokas of Rav Meir and the Chachamim applies only to the leg of an ubar or even to an aver meduldal. According to Rav Shimon ben Lakish, the machlokas as to whether or not the leg of the ubar is going to be a treifa or a nevela is the same question of whether shchita impacts the aver hameduldal. Is it going to be a nevela or a treifa? Rav Yochanan says no. Everybody agrees it's not going to be kosher. So the shchita doesn't help it at all, which makes it a nevela. Amar Reb Yossi b'Reb Chanina. Reb Yossi Reb Chanina says, "My time de Reb Yochanan aliba de Rabbanon." I need you to explain something to me, says the Gemara. According to Reb Yochanan, who holds that the Aver Hameduldal is absolutely nevela, so then teach me how he views the opinion of the Chachamim, who hold it's a treifa. Says the Gemara, it's very simple. 3 lines from the bottom. Hi, when we're talking about a case of an ubar, Isle takanta bechazara. It always had the possibility of putting its leg back inside, and then everything would have been fine. But viha lesle takanta bechazara. But when it comes to the leg of the aver that's meduldal, there is no repair. That limb is a goner. There's nothing to do about it. So the cases are not similar, and that's why the Chachamim would say that it has a different halacha. Meisvei says the Gemara, asking on this, Amar lahem Rav Meir, what did we learn earlier? What did Rav Meir say to the Chachamim about this? Lo, that im tiara shchitas treifa osa ves aver hamadul dal ba davar shebegufa. When do we see that a shchita helps a treifa to lower its status? That's only in reference to the mother itself and one of its detached limbs. But to tahir es ha'ubar davar she'ena gufa. So we have to understand this line. What did he mean when he said this? That it seems to be that the status lowers from nevela to treifa only for the mother itself and a detached limb. But when it comes to the ubar, that's not true. Turning to the top of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, and we'll just learn 8 more lines or so, and then we'll stop for the night. It's anyways going to be Ma'ariv soon. Says the Gemara as follows. Bishlama the Reb Shimon ben Lakish. I could understand this version of Rav Meir when we look through the lens of Rav Shimon ben Lakish that the machlokes between Rav Meir and the Chachamim also applies to the Aver Meduldal. Ledivreim ka'amar lahu. This was what Rav Meir was saying back to the Chachamim. Lididi, according to me, says Rav Meir, Loshna Aver de Ubar. I don't care if you're talking about the leg of the ubar that was cut. Veloshna aver de behema, this aver, the aver that's meduldal, that's detached. Ki hadadenin. Mitzidi, says Rav Meir, there is no difference between those two limbs, the leg of the ubar and the aver meduldal. Ela de Rav Yochanan, but according to Rav Yochanan, who holds that an aver meduldal is always going to be tamei kasha, then Rav Meir's opinion doesn't make sense. It doesn't click at all. Because of that, the Gemara pivots and re-understands the nature of the machlokas between Rav Shimon ben Lakish and Rav Yochanan in regards to the machlokas of Rav Meir and the Chachamim. Elaki itmar, hachi itmar. Really, the machlokas is like this. Amar Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Rav Shimon ben Lakish looks at the machlokas in our Mishnah on the bottom of Ayin Beis Amud Aleph. The machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim, and he says, "Ke machlokes be'ubarim." Whatever the machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim have by an ubar, kach machlokes be'evarim. The same thing is true with an aver hameduldal. The Rav Yochanan Amar, he argues with Rav Shimon ben Lakish, but says differently than last time. Last time he said that shchita doesn't help an aver meduldal at all. Let's see what he says here. Rav Yochanan Amar machlokes be'ever de ubar. Aval be'ever de behema divrei akol ein shchita ose nipol. It doesn't make it into a nipol, namely, it's acceptable. Okay, good. Now this is a different version of the machlokes. Amar Rav Yosi Reb Chanina, my taima de Reb Yochanan aliba de Reb Meir. How then do we understand the shita of Reb Yochanan within Reb Meir? So says the Gemara, hi gufa, v'hai lav gufa. He says that there's a difference between them. One is a reference to the guf itself, and one is a reference to that which is not part of the guf. And therefore, we're able to understand the shita of Rav Meir within this machlokas, Rav Shimon ben Lakish and Rav Yochanan. We're going to stop right here at Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef. Emir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful